The porch still smelled like lemon oil. Beth's doing, not my son's, when I slipped in through the garden gate. Still, I moved slow, quiet, the lie of just a trip hanging in the cold like held breath. As I passed the window, I heard Colin laugh. My son, calling my journals clutter and my house prime real estate. While Beth poured wine over my old quilt, he said, "She'll never know. We've got time." The same child I once held through fevers now erased me between sips. That's when I knew. I raised a son, but made room for a stranger. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The morning sun glazed over the snow-flecked roofs of Boise as Lena Ward zipped up her suitcase, each motion deliberate, measured, like punctuation marks in a sentence she'd already decided to end. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and old pine, the scent of decades of her life in these walls. She paused at the doorway to the living room, taking in the framed photographs on the mantel. Her late husband's smile, Colin's high school graduation, the last Christmas before Beth arrived, and everything turned glossy and hollow. By the time Colin and Beth showed up, Lena had the kettle whistling. Beth came in first, perfume wafting ahead of her like a fog, her bright smile almost too rehearsed. Colin followed, his coat still buttoned, the picture of the dutiful son. "So, Mom," Colin said, taking off his gloves. "Big trip, huh? Where to this time?" "Just a week to clear my head," Lena said softly, pouring tea into 3 mugs. "You know, after the winter I could use a little quiet." Beth laughed lightly, brushing invisible lint off her cashmere sweater. "Oh, that sounds lovely. Somewhere warm, I hope?" "Not too warm," Lena replied. "Somewhere I can think." They exchanged a look, quick, sharp, and hungry. Lena noticed. She always noticed. They tried to hide their relief behind polite concern, but their eyes told another story. "Well, we'll keep an eye on things here," Colin said, sipping his tea. "Don't you worry about a thing." "That's thoughtful," Lena murmured. She smiled, not at them, but at the window behind them, at the pale reflection of her own face, unreadable. When their car finally pulled away that afternoon, Lena didn't head toward the interstate. Instead, she drove 30 miles north, past bare cottonwoods and half-frozen creeks, until the road narrowed into silence. The cabin she rented sat tucked between pines and an old gravel path. Inside, it smelled faintly of cedar and coffee grounds. She unpacked just enough to make it look real. A toothbrush, a sweater, a paperback she'd already read 3 times. For 2 days, she lived the lie. She bought groceries at the small-town market, smiled at strangers, and took quiet walks by the lake. The peace was real, but so was the ache. She replayed years of small betrayals. Beth replacing her curtains without asking, Colin brushing off her questions about finances, that cold moment last Thanksgiving when he'd said, "Mom, maybe it's time you start simplifying." Simplifying. That had been the first warning. On the 3rd morning, Tony Ramos pulled up in his old Chevy, engine grumbling. He stepped out, dusted snow off his jacket, and looked at her with a mix of curiosity and quiet loyalty. "You sure about this?" he asked. Lena locked the cabin door and nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything." The drive back was silent, except for the hum of tires on asphalt and the faint rhythm of her heartbeat in her ears. The closer they got to home, the heavier the air felt. When Tony stopped 2 blocks away, Lena slipped out, hood drawn low, and moved through her backyard gate like a shadow. Her boots barely crunched on the frost. From the back, the house looked peaceful. Too peaceful. The curtains were open in the guest house, and faint laughter floated through the air. Lena crept closer, careful not to let the motion light catch her. Through the window, she saw Beth, her hair tied up, a glass of white wine in hand, tossing something into a garbage bag. Lena squinted, the breath catching in her throat. It wasn't trash. It was a quilt her mother had made. The same one Lena kept folded on the couch for 50 years. She watched as Beth threw in a porcelain figurine, then an old journal, then the wooden jewelry box that once sat on Lena's dresser. Beth's voice drifted through the cracked window. She won't even miss this stuff. It's just old lady clutter? A burst of laughter followed from somewhere inside. Colin's voice, casual and amused. Good riddance. Once the papers go through, we'll give this place a real upgrade. Lena's hand tightened on the windowsill until her knuckles whitened. Her pulse slowed, steadied. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She took a step back, into the cold shadow of the oak tree, and exhaled slowly, like a teacher watching her students fail a test she'd warned them about. The wind picked up, scattering a few torn receipts near her feet. On one of them, half buried in frost, she saw her own signature, crooked, unfamiliar, and freshly inked. Lena stared at it for a long, silent moment. Then she turned toward the darkness of the yard, her expression flat, her voice barely above a whisper. They think I'm gone, she said to no one. Let's see what they do next. The next evening, Lena sat in the darkened guest house, the glow of her tablet reflecting in her glasses. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from focus. On the screen, a split view of her own home played out. Living room, kitchen, hallway. Every angle she'd installed for safety after her husband died now became her window into betrayal. In the living room feed, Beth twirled in front of the camera, wine glass in hand, laughter too loud, too staged. 4 women lounged around her, neighbors probably, or acquaintances from her yoga studio, each trying too hard to look relaxed in a house that wasn't theirs. Lena could see the faint reflection of the chandelier glinting off her old oak coffee table, the one Beth had once called rustic in a sad way. Isn't this place something? Beth said, her voice syrupy. Like, cozy grandma chic. We're going to make it so different once the transfer's final. One of the women giggled. Transfer? Beth waved her hand, casual. Oh, just boring paperwork. Colin's handling it. We're turning this place into an Airbnb for travelers. It's too big for one person anyway. Lena leaned forward, her breath shallow. The words hit like small, precise knives. She turned up the volume. Another woman swirled her wine. Won't she, need to approve that? Beth smiled, teeth bright, eyes cold. Not for long. Colin's sorting the legal side. We're looking into assisted living for her. Something comfortable before the holidays. She'll thank us eventually. The group laughed, the kind of brittle laughter that filled empty people. Lena's hand went still on the tablet. For a moment, she could almost hear her late husband's voice. Don't let them talk to you like you're gone, Lena. She muted the feed before her heart could betray her composure. Outside, the air smelled of frost and wood smoke. She stepped into the yard, pulling her coat tight around her shoulders. Across the fence, Mrs. Brooks's kitchen light flicked on. A familiar silhouette paused by the window, then turned away. Lena exhaled slowly. She couldn't afford witnesses yet. Headlights flared near the end of the driveway, Tony's old truck. He got out quietly, carrying a small black case. Brought the audio gear, he whispered. You sure you want to do this now? Lena nodded. They're comfortable tonight. That's when people show you who they really are. Inside, the two of them moved like ghosts. Tony set up a small receiver by the vent near the living room. The faint hum blended with the sound of laughter from the other side of the wall. Lena held her breath, listening through the vent. The clink of glasses, the scrape of heels, the casual cruelty of people who thought they were safe. Colin's voice entered the mix. Low, confident, too familiar. Once everything's signed, we'll get better furniture in here. More modern, open it up. The place will rent for a fortune. Beth's reply was a purr. And Mom? Assisted living before Christmas. I've already looked up a few. A long pause. Colin sighed, almost impatient. She'll adjust. People her age don't need space. They need supervision. Tony's eyes met Lena's across the hallway. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The quiet fury in his expression said everything. They retreated back into the guest house, the recorder still running. Lena watched the feed again in silence. The women had started dancing to some pop song, spilling red wine on her rug. Beth didn't even notice. They think I'm fading, Lena said finally. But I've never seen more clearly. Tony looked down at the floor. You want me to stay tonight? No, she said. They won't notice me yet. But they will. She shut the tablet, the screen going black. Outside, laughter echoed faintly across the yard, a mockery of life, of family, of trust. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, her mind razor sharp. She didn't cry, she didn't rage. Instead, she wrote down every word she'd heard, every timestamp, every small betrayal. By the time the house went quiet, her notes filled 2 full pages. When she finally stood, her knees cracked softly. She placed the notepad in her nightstand drawer and looked once more toward the main house through the window. The lights inside flickered as Beth walked past the living room camera. Just for a second, her face turned directly toward the lens, like she felt the gaze. Lena didn't move. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the feed cut to static. Lena's eyes narrowed. So, she whispered, they're smarter than I thought. The frost outside thickened on the glass, but Lena stayed seated, unblinking, waiting for the next move. The next morning, Boise wore a thin veil of fog, soft, deceptive, and quiet, like a lie pretending to be peace. Lena drove downtown with both hands gripping the steering wheel, her mind as cold and clear as the road ahead. The courthouse clock chimed 10 as she turned onto Bannock Street, parking in front of a brick building with the words Drake & Associates, Estate Law etched on the glass door. Inside, the office smelled faintly of espresso and new paper. Allison Drake stood by her desk, tall and composed, her dark hair pinned back with surgical precision. She'd been Lena's lawyer for over a decade, back when the biggest thing they'd handled was her late husband's pension. Mrs. Ward, Allison said, her voice steady, eyes alert. You said this was urgent? Lena handed her a small folder. I need to make some changes, quietly. Allison opened it, scanning the old will. Changes to beneficiaries? To everything, Lena said. Every clause, every line that ties my son or his wife to this house, this land, or my estate. They're done. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the heater and the soft click of Allison's pen. I take it this isn't a rash decision? Rash? Lena let out a low, humorless breath. No, it's overdue. Allison nodded once. Then let's start from the top. The next hour passed in quiet, surgical precision. Lena signed document after document, her signature steady, deliberate. Allison drafted a new estate plan, tight, ironclad, immune to emotional appeals or legal tricks. Colin and Beth's names disappeared from every clause, every account, every contingency. When they reached the inheritance section, Lena paused. I want the house tied to someone who'll never misuse it, she said. A place for something that still matters. Allison tilted her head. You have someone in mind? Yes, Lena said. The Boise Literacy Foundation. They helped me with funding back when I was a principal. They've earned more from me than my son ever will. Allison smiled faintly, typing the words into the file. That's poetic justice, Mrs. Ward, turning their greed into someone else's gift. Justice isn't poetic, Lena said, her tone dry. It's patient. By the time they reached the last page, Allison's expression had shifted. No longer simply professional. There was respect there. Quiet, genuine respect. "One more thing," Lena said. "Emergency power of attorney. It needs to go to someone I can trust if they try anything before this finalizes." Allison leaned back. "Tony?" Lena nodded. "He's loyal, smart enough to stay quiet, steady enough not to panic." "Then that's who it will be." Allison began drafting the transfer. "You know this won't sit well with your son once he finds out." Lena's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's the idea." Allison studied her for a moment. "Do you want me to send a courtesy notice when everything's filed?" "No," Lena said sharply. Then quieter. "They moved against me in secret. I'll respond in silence." The statement hung in the air between them. Clean, cold, absolute. When the final papers were notarized, Allison slid the completed file into a heavy envelope and sealed it. "It's done," she said. "They can't touch your home, your savings, or your name." Lena rose slowly, her hands steady on the edge of the desk. "Good. Then they'll learn what it feels like to lose something they never earned." Outside, the fog had lifted. The streets glistened from a light drizzle, and the reflection of the courthouse windows shimmered like glass. Lena paused on the sidewalk, pulling her scarf tighter. Across the street, a car idled. Black, tinted windows, engine humming low. She felt the weight of someone's eyes on her before the car eased away, turning down the block without signaling. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A text from Tony. "Tony. Cameras reset. They tried to access the system last night. No luck." Lena's fingers tightened around the phone. She looked up at the pale winter sky and let out a slow, measured breath. "Lena. Good. Keep watching. They're starting to get nervous." She slipped the phone back into her coat and crossed the street toward her car. The fog swallowed her as she went, but her expression didn't change. No fear, no hesitation, only purpose. From the office window above, Allison watched her go, a faint crease between her brows. She reached for the sealed file on her desk, tapping her pen against it once before locking it in the safe. Down below, Lena's taillights disappeared into the mist. The silence that followed felt heavy, charged, like the air right before a storm. The afternoon light slanted low through the trees as Lena stepped through her backyard gate, the crunch of frozen grass soft under her boots. She moved with quiet purpose, every step measured. The air smelled faintly of iron and pine sap, the world holding its breath around her. Inside her home, everything looked just slightly wrong. Pictures rearranged, cushions fluffed the way Beth preferred. Not her. The silence wasn't peace anymore. It was intrusion disguised as order. She moved first to the kitchen. The trash bin was full. Wine bottles, takeout containers, and something glinting under the paper scraps. Lena reached in and froze. Between crumpled napkins and a shredded receipt lay a gold band dulled with age, her grandmother's wedding ring, the one she'd worn on a chain since she was 20. Lena lifted it out carefully, turning it between her fingers. A tiny nick on the edge, the mark from when her grandmother dropped it during the blackout of '62. She knew every scratch, every dent. This wasn't just lost, it had been thrown away. She didn't gasp, didn't curse. She slipped the ring into her pocket and exhaled slowly, letting the rage cool into something far more useful. Precision. In the study, the sight hit her harder. 3 cardboard boxes sat stacked by the window, marked with black Sharpie, "Donate." She crouched beside them, brushing her fingers across the flaps. Inside, neatly packed, were her old journals, 20 years of notes, reflections, school memories, even letters she'd written to her late husband after his death. Pages that smelled faintly of ink and lavender, now treated like clutter. Beth's handwriting covered one of the sticky notes. Maybe the thrift shop will take these. No one wants old notebooks. Lena stared at that line until her eyes blurred. Then she laughed quietly, a low, humorless sound that filled the empty house like static. She stood and began moving through the rooms, her steps lighter now, purposeful. From her coat pocket, she withdrew 3 tiny recording devices, each the size of a button, each already synced to her tablet. One behind the lamp in the living room, another tucked beneath the kitchen counter near the wine rack. The third, carefully, beneath the dresser in the guest room, where Beth kept her spare clothes. Every click, every hum, every careless confession, they would all belong to Lena now. As she worked, the sliding glass door creaked faintly open. Lena turned, heart steady, and caught a flash of movement beyond the fence. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks stood there, her gloved hands gripping the fence post like she'd just seen a ghost. "Lena?" The voice cracked, half whisper, half gasp. "Lord, I thought you were gone." Lena stepped outside, holding a finger to her lips. The winter sun caught the silver in her hair, the sharp calm in her eyes. "I am, Evelyn," she said quietly. "At least, that's what they believe." Mrs. Brooks blinked, struggling to process it. "But your son, he told everyone you went on some retreat down south. He's been bringing people over, redecorating, like you were." "I know." Lena's tone was soft, but firm. "And you can't tell anyone you've seen me. Not yet." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Are you in trouble?" "No," Lena said, slipping her hands into her coat pockets. "But they are." Mrs. Brooks looked as though she might argue, but something in Lena's gaze stopped her. Instead, she nodded once, slow and understanding. "You always were the steady one," she murmured. Lena gave a faint smile. "Still am." When the neighbor finally retreated, Lena lingered in the yard, watching the twilight gather around her home. The windows glowed faintly golden, but the warmth was an illusion. Inside that light, snakes nested. She'd spent her whole life teaching students to recognize deceit dressed as charm. Now, her final lesson was personal. That night, she entered her old bedroom for the first time in weeks. The familiar creak of the floorboard under the window greeted her, along with the faint smell of cedar and linen. The room was dim, the bedside lamp casting a soft amber halo on the quilt. The same quilt Beth had once deemed too musty. Lena set her journal on the nightstand, the ring still in her palm. She stared at it a moment longer before placing it gently on the dresser beside her husband's photo. Then she lay down, pulling the quilt up to her chest. The house was quiet. Too quiet. But beneath that silence, she could feel the recorders whirring, storing truth in their tiny hearts. Outside, wind whispered against the glass. A faint creak came from somewhere near the kitchen, followed by the soft click of a door shutting. Lena's eyes opened. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Just listened. Somewhere in her own home, someone was still awake. Morning broke gray and thin, the kind of Boise winter day where the light seemed uncertain whether to rise at all. Lena stood by the window, coffee cooling in her hand, her eyes fixed on the mailbox at the end of the driveway. A car had idled there for a full minute before driving off, again. The second time this week. The feeling in her chest wasn't fear. It was confirmation. By mid-morning, she was standing inside the Ada County Records office, the walls lined with beige filing cabinets and the hum of printers filling the silence. A clerk with reading glasses perched low on her nose flipped through documents with slow, methodical care. "You said your name's Ward, Lena Ward?" the woman asked. "Yes," Lena said, her voice calm but clipped. "There should be no active filings under my name except property taxes." The clerk hesitated. "Well, there's something recent. A power of attorney submission filed 3 weeks ago. It lists a secondary signatory. Your son, Colin Ward. Lena froze. The world seemed to tilt, just slightly. Can I see it? The clerk handed over a printout. The paper trembled slightly in Lena's hand, though her face remained composed. Her signature looped neatly at the bottom, only it wasn't hers. The L curved wrong, the tail too short. A perfect imitation for anyone else, but Lena had taught handwriting analysis to 8th graders for 30 years. Her voice was steady when she said, "I'll need a certified copy." "Of course, ma'am," the clerk replied gently, as though sensing she was touching something fragile. Lena walked out into the wind with the document clutched like evidence from a crime scene. She didn't drive straight home. Instead, she stopped by Drake and Associates, pushing through the glass door with deliberate force. Allison looked up from her desk. "Mrs. Ward?" Lena laid the paper flat before her. "He forged me." Allison's expression hardened in an instant. "Let me see that." She examined the signature, flipping the page toward the light. "This is deliberate fraud, Lena. He's been using this to transfer assets. Hasn't he?" "I don't know yet," Lena said quietly, "but I intend to." Allison reached for her phone. "I'll draft a cease and desist and file an immediate freeze on any transactions tied to your estate." Her tone left no room for hesitation. "We'll make sure he can't move a penny." As Allison worked, Lena stared at the forged signature again, her own name, her identity, used like a weapon against her. She thought of all the times Colin had smiled just a little too smoothly, all the phone calls that ended with him saying, "Don't worry, Mom, I've got it handled." He'd handled it all right, just not for her. That night, back at the house, Lena installed 2 motion-activated cameras under the eaves herself. The cold bit into her knuckles, but she didn't stop until the devices blinked green. One pointed toward the mailbox, the other toward the side path Colin always used when visiting. Tony offered to stay, but she refused. "If they see your truck here, they'll know I'm watching," she said. When he left, Lena sat by the window again, the hum of the new cameras faint and reassuring. The frost outside reflected her face. Hard, calm, ready. Around 9, the motion alert chimed. Lena pulled up the live feed. Beth stood at the front porch, a thick envelope in hand. She looked over her shoulder before bending to the mail slot. Her voice carried faintly through the mic. "Colin, she still gets mail here. You told me the transfer was final." "Keep it down," came Colin's muffled reply from the driveway. "She's out of state. Doesn't matter what's addressed here." Lena leaned forward, heart thudding slow and steady. The camera caught Beth rifling through the envelope before slipping one of the letters into her purse. 5 minutes later, a car door slammed, and they were gone. Lena replayed the footage twice, then saved it to a secure drive. Evidence. Undeniable. The next morning, Allison called. "The cease and desist is filed. Any transfers attempted after noon today will flag automatically." "Good," Lena said. "Let him wonder why the walls stopped moving." Allison hesitated. "You're remarkably composed, Lena. Most people—" "I'm not most people," Lena said quietly. "I raised him better. He chose worse." Later that afternoon, word began to ripple through the neighborhood. Lena's friend Susan stopped Beth outside the co-op, asking too sweetly, "So, you heard from your mother-in-law lately? Saw someone who looked just like her at the post office." Beth's smile cracked just enough to show fear. "She's traveling. Must be mistaken." Susan shrugged. "Funny. The woman I saw was holding a legal envelope." That evening, Lena watched her porch camera again. Beth appeared once more, alone this time, fumbling through another handful of mail. Her eyes darted nervously toward the streetlights. "Still in town, aren't you?" Beth whispered to herself, voice thin with dread. You always were too stubborn to leave. Lena zoomed in on the frame, the faint reflection of Beth's face flickering in the glass. In that moment, Lena's expression softened. Not pity, not triumph, just the cold satisfaction of certainty. They had underestimated the wrong woman. The camera light blinked once, capturing Beth's frightened face before she turned and fled into the night. Lena smiled faintly, whispering into the quiet room, "Checkmate's coming." Snow dusted the edge of the sidewalks as Allison Drake's black sedan rolled down Elmwood Avenue. The sky hung heavy and pale, the kind of cold that made the air sting, but the mind sharp. In her passenger seat sat 2 sealed envelopes, both embossed with Drake & Associates letterhead, each stamped, "Urgent, hand delivery." She parked at the curb in front of Colin and Beth's modern farmhouse. White paneling, perfect symmetry, no soul. The lawn lights flicked on as she stepped out, her heels crunching against the ice. Inside, laughter, forced, brittle, broke through the front door just before she knocked. Beth opened it first, wine glass in hand, the practiced smile faltering when she saw Allison. "Oh," she stammered. "Allison? We didn't— What a surprise." "Not a surprise," Allison said smoothly, her voice precise as glass. "A legal courtesy." She handed over the first envelope. "Cease and desist orders concerning the unauthorized use of Mrs. Ward's power of attorney." Beth's fingers twitched around the glass. Sorry, I don't think I understand." Colin appeared behind her, casual in tone but with a flash of panic behind the eyes. "What's this about?" Allison met his gaze directly. "Forgery, attempted fraud, and illegal initiation of property transfer. You forged your mother's signature, Mr. Ward. These letters formally notify you that any further interference with her estate will be met with criminal charges." Beth's smile collapsed completely. "Wait. What? No, there must be some mistake. Colin wouldn't—" Allison's expression didn't flicker. "I have a certified copy from the county records office, along with your wife's fingerprints on stolen correspondence." For a long moment no one spoke. Beth's face drained of color. Colin's jaw flexed, eyes narrowing, searching for an angle that didn't exist. Finally, he barked, "This is ridiculous. My mother's sick. She's been acting erratic for months. She probably doesn't even remember signing half those forms." Allison stepped closer, lowering her voice but not her intensity. "Careful, Mr. Ward. That line won't hold up in court. Your mother underwent a voluntary cognitive evaluation last year. I have the sealed medical certification in my possession." Beth turned to him, whispering, "You said—" Colin snapped, "Not now." The silence between them cracked wide open. Allison slid the second envelope toward him. "That's the injunction. Effective immediately. All transactions and transfers related to your mother's assets are frozen. Attempting to access or alter them again will result in federal investigation." She let that hang there, sharp and deliberate. Then, as if remembering a final detail, she added, "And just so you're aware, Mrs. Ward's legal power remains fully intact. She's made no declaration of incompetence. She's watching every move you make." Beth's eyes darted toward the window. "She's back?" Allison's brow lifted slightly. "I didn't say that." The tension in the room shifted like a storm front. Colin's bravado cracked. "This is her doing, isn't it? She's setting us up, playing the victim while she manipulates everyone." Allison smiled for the first time, cool and razor-sharp. "Your mother doesn't need to manipulate anyone, Mr. Ward. She simply tells the truth, and I make sure it's heard." At that, she turned, her heels tapping against the hardwood as she walked out. Beth followed, voice trembling. "Please, Allison, just tell her we're sorry. We didn't mean for things to go this far. I tried to—" Allison stopped at the door. Save your apologies for the court transcript. Then she stepped outside, closing the door behind her. Across the street, Lena waited in Tony's truck, engine idling low. She watched through the windshield as Allison crossed the icy walkway toward them, coat fluttering in the wind. "All delivered," Allison said, sliding into the back seat. "You were right, they didn't see it coming." Lena didn't answer. She just stared at the house, the lights glowing too warmly for people that cold. Her hand rested on the envelope of evidence in her lap, the forged document and screenshots clipped neatly together. Tony broke the silence. "You want me to change the locks tonight?" "Every one of them," Lena said, "and install the new security system before sunrise. If they step 1 foot near this property again, I want it on record." "Got it," Tony said. Allison watched her, curiosity flickering beneath her calm. "You're not angry, are you?" Lena turned slightly, her eyes unreadable. "Angry wastes time. I prefer results." As Tony drove them back toward her street, the truck's headlights carved through falling snow. When they reached her gate, Lena climbed out, the night air biting against her cheeks. Tony followed her with his toolbox, working in silence as she stood on the porch, watching her own breath fog in the cold. When the last new lock clicked into place, Tony straightened. "That should do it." Lena looked at him, her voice quiet but fierce. "They tried to take my home, Tony. Let's make sure they can't even find a way in again." From down the street, a car engine started. Headlights flared, then dimmed, lingering too long before pulling away. Lena didn't flinch. She simply turned the new key in the lock and stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a solid, satisfying click. Outside, snow continued to fall, soft, relentless, covering every track that led to her house. The headlines on the county court docket glared like quiet insults. Ward, Colin, petition for guardianship over Ward. Lena M. Allison's email came at dawn, short and clipped. "He's claiming mental decline. Motion hearing in 2 weeks. Prepare everything." Lena sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. The morning light pushed through the curtains, thin and gray. For a long moment she didn't move. She'd expected retaliation. Colin had always been a sore loser. But this was bold, even for him. By 9 a.m., she was in Allison's office, coat still dusted with frost. Allison didn't waste time with pleasantries. "He's filed for temporary guardianship," she said, sliding the motion across the desk. "Claims you've been showing signs of cognitive decline for over a year." Lena's mouth twitched, not in surprise, but in grim amusement. "And his evidence?" Allison flipped open the file. A handful of old texts, some bank statements with errors he probably planted himself, and Beth's sworn statement claiming you confused her with your insurance agent. Lena's voice was dry. "I confused her, all right. Just not the way she thinks." Allison leaned back, studying her client. "We'll counter fast. But I want you to see a neurologist. Voluntarily. It'll demolish their argument before it starts." "Of course," Lena said. "Schedule it today." 3 days later, Lena sat in a sterile white exam room under soft humming lights, answering memory tests with clinical precision. "Name as many animals as you can that start with the letter B," the doctor asked. "Bear, buffalo, badger, baboon, bobcat, barracuda." He raised an eyebrow. "Fast recall. Let's keep going." When the tests were done, he smiled. "You're sharper than most people half your age, Mrs. Ward. There's no sign of decline." "Put that in writing," Lena said. He did. By the following week, Allison's briefcase overflowed with ammunition, medical documentation, timestamps from Lena's security recordings, and the audio clips Tony had captured during wine night. Every sneer, every plan, every whispered insult. "All admissible," Allison said, her tone crisp as she organized the files. They wanted to play character assassination. We'll answer with truth. In the courtroom, the air felt taut, charged. Lena sat beside Allison at the plaintiff's table, composed and impeccably dressed in navy wool, her silver hair pinned neatly. Across from her, Colin and Beth whispered furiously with their attorney, a man too young and too slick for his own good. When the judge entered, Colin's lawyer rose with a practiced air of concern. "Your Honor, my client is deeply worried about his mother's state of mind. There have been numerous incidents, confused phone calls, financial irregularities." "Show me evidence," the judge interrupted. The lawyer adjusted his tie, rifling through a folder. "We've submitted supporting exhibits, texts that indicate confusion." Allison rose smoothly. "If I may, Your Honor." The judge nodded. Allison set a single folder on the table. "Those texts were fabricated. Metadata analysis shows they were sent from a secondary phone belonging to Mrs. Beth Ward, not my client." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Colin's lawyer blinked. "That's impossible." Allison's voice cut through like a blade. "We also have an authenticated audio recording of Mr. and Mrs. Ward discussing putting Mrs. Ward in assisted living before any such confusion allegedly occurred." The judge's expression cooled. "Play it." The recording filled the courtroom. Beth's laughter, Colin's voice casually saying, "Once the transfer goes through, we'll Airbnb the whole house." Beth's face went pale. Colin tried to speak, but his lawyer shot him a warning glance. When the audio ended, Allison placed a sealed document on the table. "Additionally, here's a voluntary neurological evaluation from a board-certified specialist, verifying my client's full cognitive capacity. There is no mental decline. The petition is baseless." The judge skimmed the report, jaw tightening. "Mr. Ward, do you have a response?" Colin stood, his smile brittle. "She's manipulating everyone. This is what she does. She's always been controlling, and now she's turning my own lawyer against me." Allison didn't even look at him. "Objection to characterization," she said coolly. "We deal in facts, not family drama." The judge nodded. Sustained. He closed the file. "Given the evidence, I'm calling for a preliminary hearing. We'll determine whether Mr. Ward's claims constitute intentional fraud." Beth gasped. "Fraud?" Colin's face drained of color. "You can't." "I can," the judge said sharply. "And I will." He struck his gavel once. "Hearing set for next Friday. Both parties to produce full discovery. Court adjourned." As chairs scraped and murmurs rose, Lena turned to Allison. Her face remained still, but her voice carried quiet iron. "He wanted to make me look weak. Instead, he's standing trial." Allison gave a small, satisfied nod. "You've taken back the story, Lena." Lena gathered her papers, glancing once across the aisle. Beth avoided her gaze, eyes glistening. Colin looked like a man realizing too late that his empire was made of paper. As they walked out of the courtroom, the hallway lights flickered faintly overhead. Lena's phone buzzed, an alert from her motion cameras. A new notification, movement detected. Back gate, 11:32 a.m. She froze mid-step, the color draining from her face, though her voice stayed calm. "They're not done yet." The courthouse was colder than usual that morning, its marble floors echoing every footstep like a warning. Lena Ward walked beside Allison, her navy coat buttoned to the throat, her face an unreadable mask of calm. The headlines from local blogs had already begun trickling out. "Family feud over Boise estate reaches courtroom." Reporters lingered on the courthouse steps, calling her name, but she didn't break stride. Her heels clicked steadily, each sound a metronome of quiet resolve. Inside courtroom 2B, the air hummed with anticipation. The gallery was packed. Neighbors, old colleagues, even Mrs. Brooks perched in the back row, her gloved hands clutching a tissue she hadn't yet used. Colin sat at the defense table, his suit too tight around the shoulders, his smile forced. Beth, beside him, looked brittle, like porcelain under pressure. Their attorney, the same slick man from before, rifled through papers as if confidence could be manufactured on command. Allison set her briefcase down and leaned close to Lena. "We've got everything we need," she murmured. "Let them talk first." The judge entered. A sharp-eyed woman with the posture of someone who'd seen too many families destroy themselves in her courtroom. "Let's begin," she said simply. Colin's lawyer rose. "Your Honor, my client maintains that his actions were born out of concern. Mrs. Honant's words inconsistencies, financial and otherwise, led him to believe she required oversight. This entire situation has been grossly exaggerated." Allison didn't look at him. "We'll see about that." The judge nodded toward her. "Ms. Drake, your response?" Allison rose slowly, deliberate as a blade being drawn. "Your Honor, what we're about to present is not speculation, not hearsay, but irrefutable evidence. Mr. Ward's own words, captured on video." The lights dimmed slightly as the projector flickered to life. On screen, Colin's face filled the courtroom, recorded by one of Lena's discreet cameras. His voice was unmistakable. Calm, confident, damning. "Once it's filed, she'll never know. The signature's close enough. By the time anyone checks, the transfer will be through." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge's gavel struck once, silencing the noise. Allison stepped forward. This footage was authenticated by the county records office and time-stamped before the power of attorney filing. It proves premeditation, not protection. Colin's lawyer sputtered. That could be edited." "It's uncut," Allison said. "We'll provide the raw file for forensic verification." Beth's hands shook visibly. She leaned toward Colin, whispering harshly, "You said you deleted everything." Colin's voice rose, too loud. "They set me up. She planted that camera to—" "Mr. Ward," the judge cut in sharply. "One more outburst and I'll have you removed." Lena didn't look at him. She sat still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression a perfect portrait of grace under fire. Allison clicked the remote again. Another screen appeared. This time, a text thread. Beth's words glowed across the projection. "She's losing it, keeps misplacing things. Perfect timing to make the switch." The judge leaned forward, reading the next line aloud. "Once Colin finalizes the forms, we'll have the house before Christmas." Beth covered her face, trembling. "I didn't mean... Those were jokes. I was..." Allison's tone was razor-thin. "You were mocking a woman you believed was helpless. Fortunately for you, she wasn't." The judge's gaze turned to the witness bench. "You have someone to corroborate Mrs. Ward's state of mind?" Allison nodded. "We do." The bailiff opened the side door. Mrs. Susan Brooks, Lena's neighbor and longtime friend, stepped forward. She adjusted her scarf, nerves obvious but resolve stronger. Allison smiled reassuringly. "Mrs. Brooks, can you tell the court about your last few interactions with Mrs. Ward?" Susan cleared her throat. "Lena was fine, sharp as ever. She knew exactly what was happening. She even told me not to say she was home yet. Said she wanted proof first." "And did she seem confused, unstable, or unfit?" Susan shook her head. "No, ma'am. She seemed angry. Quiet angry. The kind that comes from knowing someone's betraying you." A ripple of uneasy laughter spread through the spectators before the judge silenced it. Allison turned back toward the bench. "Your Honor, the defense's entire claim rests on fabricated confusion and deliberate deceit. We've provided evidence of forgery, premeditation, and malicious intent." The judge studied Colin for a long moment. He shifted in his seat, sweat visible at his temples. "Mr. Ward," the judge said finally, her tone icy, "this court doesn't take kindly to manipulation. The evidence against you suggests not concern for your mother, but calculated greed. Beth tried to interject. We just wanted to help. The judge cut her off. Help yourselves, perhaps. She turned toward the clerk. Enter this into the record. Preliminary finding of malicious fabrication. Full hearing scheduled to determine criminal liability. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Lena's heartbeat remained steady, her face unreadable. She rose slowly as the gavel struck. Colin's eyes found hers, pleading, angry, small. You did this to me, he hissed. Lena looked at him for the first time all day. No, Colin, she said quietly. You did this to yourself. Allison placed a hand on Lena's shoulder, steering her toward the aisle. As they stepped into the hall, the crowd erupted behind them. Whispers, cameras, the buzz of a story breaking. Allison leaned close. It's turning, Lena. We've got them cornered. But Lena's gaze drifted toward the glass doors at the far end of the hall. Through them, she saw Tony waiting in the truck, and, parked across the street, a black SUV she didn't recognize. Its engine idled, no driver in sight. Cornered, Lena murmured. Let's hope they think so too. The winter sun broke late over Boise, its weak light slicing through a morning that should have felt victorious. But Lena knew better than to trust calm weather after a storm. She stood at her kitchen counter, the same one Beth had once mocked as too outdated, stirring a cup of coffee that had gone untouched. Her phone vibrated twice before she answered. Allison? Her lawyer's voice came crisp through the line. It's official. The county prosecutor just filed charges. Colin Ward. 2 counts of felony fraud, 1 of forgery. Lena didn't exhale so much as allow the breath to leave her body. And Beth? Subpoenaed for mail theft and conspiracy to defraud, Allison said. She's trying to claim ignorance, but the texts, the video, and the letter she opened on your porch, those sealed it. The DA isn't buying her performance. Outside, snow dripped from the roof in uneven rhythms. Lena listened, letting each drop mark another piece of the life she was shedding. Good, she said finally. Let them both answer for it. By noon, the story had spread. The Idaho Statesman ran the headline online. Local man accused of forging mother's signature in property fraud case. Neighbors read it on their phones over lunch, whispering in coffee shops, passing the link in text chains. Some shook their heads. Others smiled faintly. Small-town justice carried a certain satisfaction. At Drake and Associates, Allison flipped her phone face down to silence the notifications. We're moving ahead with the civil suit, she told Lena as she signed the last of the filings. Emotional distress, financial damages, and reputational harm. You'll win this too, but it's about more than money now. It always was, Lena replied, her voice soft but steady. Across the desk, Allison gave a small, approving nod. The press will want a statement. I've already asked Debbie to draft one. Debbie Pierce, Lena's former colleague and longtime friend, had always been the one with a talent for phrasing the unflinching truth kindly. She arrived that afternoon, bundled in her red coat, face flushed from the cold. About time Justice had a publicist, she said with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. She opened her laptop. How do you want this to read? Lena thought for a moment before answering. Not angry, not vindictive, just honest. People forget how easily trust turns to weaponry. Remind them that I didn't fight for revenge, I fought for proof. Debbie nodded, her fingers flying across the keys. I am grateful to the court for recognizing truth when it mattered most. This was never about property. It was about dignity. For every older person who has been made to feel invisible, remember, silence isn't the same as weakness. When she read it aloud, Allison smiled faintly. That'll hit harder than any verdict. The next day, the courthouse parking lot buzzed with media vans. Colin and Beth arrived separately, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses, his jaw set tight, defiance draining by the second. Cameras clicked as they walked through the doors, their faces plastered across local news feeds before noon. Lena didn't attend that arraignment. She didn't need to. Allison called her afterward. Their lawyer withdrew, she said flatly. Conflict of interest. He cited irreconcilable ethical concerns. Lena's brows rose. He finally realized he was defending ghosts. Or criminals, Allison said. Either way, they'll be lucky to find new representation before sentencing. Lena thanked her and hung up, stepping onto her porch. The sky was a clean, pale blue, the kind that followed long storms. Across the street, Mrs. Brooks waved from her walkway. She didn't call out, just gave a small, approving nod. Lena lifted her coffee in silent acknowledgement. Later that afternoon, Tony stopped by with a box of mail, letters, cards, and even a few small bouquets left at her gate. One envelope bore familiar handwriting, from the Literacy Foundation. Inside was a short note from its director. Your generosity inspired a wave of new donors. You've done more good than you realize. Lena read it twice, her throat tightening. Then set it carefully beside her husband's old photo on the mantel. Tony lingered by the door. You finally got them, Lena. Most folks would be celebrating. She turned toward him, her expression soft but tired. I'm not done yet. Clearing your name isn't the same as reclaiming your peace. He nodded. Then what now? Now, she said. We make sure they can't twist what's left. That evening, Debbie's statement went live across local outlets. By nightfall, social media had turned. Comments filled with support, admiration, and quiet fury on Lena's behalf. She fought back with facts. Every elder deserves protection like this. Her son deserves prison, not pity. Lena read none of it. Instead, she sat by her living room window, the same one she'd watched Beth through months ago. The air smelled faintly of pine and cold metal. The house, her house, finally felt still. Outside, a delivery truck idled by the curb. The driver stepped out, leaving a padded envelope on the porch before pulling away. Lena waited until he was gone before opening it. Inside, no sender's label, just a USB drive. She stared at it, her reflection glinting off the plastic. A folded note inside read, "You missed something, Mom." Her pulse went still. For the first time in weeks, the quiet didn't feel safe. It felt like warning. By the following week, the story had spread beyond Boise's courthouse walls and into every corner of Lena Ward's quiet neighborhood. What began as rumor turned into fact, and what had once been whispered over hedges was now spoken aloud in checkout lines and coffee shops. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks was the first to tell it straight. She didn't embellish. She didn't have to. Her version was simple, deliberate, and true. Colin forged his mother's name, and she caught him. By noon that Monday, half the neighborhood knew. By the next day, everyone did. At the co-op market, where Beth once bragged about her Airbnb vision for Lena's house, her name now drew cold silence. When she walked in, a few cashiers exchanged looks. One simply turned away mid-sentence. A neighbor who had once attended her wine nights muttered, "Unbelievable," just loud enough for her to hear. At the gym, Colin tried to carry on like nothing had happened. Headphones in, shoulders squared. But whispers trailed him from the treadmills. Someone had taped a copy of the Idaho Statesman article to the locker room mirror. The headline glared back at him. Boise man charged with defrauding his own mother. He ripped it down, crumpled it, and stormed out. Across town, Lena's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first she ignored it. Texts from numbers she didn't recognize, calls that rang twice and stopped. Then came the letters, handwritten envelopes, return addresses from places she hadn't thought about in years. Former students, grown now, with children of their own, sent cards and notes, each one threaded with gratitude and disbelief. You taught me to speak up when something felt wrong. Wish I'd been as brave as you, Mrs. Ward. Still remember you reading To Kill a Mockingbird aloud like it mattered. Lena read every one of them. She didn't cry, though her throat ached like she had. She stacked them neatly in a shoebox, labeling it simply, Proof that it mattered. Outside, Tony was sanding the old bench beneath the backyard oak, the one her husband had built years ago when their son was still young enough to swing from its lowest branch. He worked quietly, the rhythm of the sander blending with the rustle of the trees. When he finished, he brushed the dust off his gloves and motioned for her to come outside. You kept it standing, he said, nodding toward the bench. Barely, Lena replied. It wobbled every time I sat down. He smiled. Not anymore. She brought out 2 mugs of tea, steam curling in the cool afternoon air. They sat side by side, the silence between them easy for once. From the corner of the yard she could hear the faint hum of a distant lawnmower, the muffled bark of a dog. The neighborhood had returned to its rhythm, but different now. People waved when they passed her gate. Some left flowers by the fence, others just slowed down, nodded, and went on their way. Tony watched her for a moment before saying, You know, you're the quiet kind of strong. Lena looked up from her tea. Is that supposed to be a compliment? He chuckled softly. It's the best kind. Doesn't need to shout to be heard. She smiled then, small, real, and unguarded. For the first time in months, her body felt lighter. The house, once haunted by echoes of betrayal, now carried the low hum of something else. Peace, fragile but genuine. The cameras still blinked quietly from the corners, but she barely noticed anymore. The silence had changed its tone. As the sun began to sink, casting gold over the yard, Lena reached for the folded newspaper on the patio table. Her name was there again, this time under the headline, Community Rallies Behind Retired Educator in Elder Fraud Case. She folded it neatly, pressing it flat with her palm. Strange, she murmured. All this time, I thought my life had already been written. Tony looked out toward the gate, where the wind stirred the cedar branches. Maybe this is the rewrite. Lena nodded. The air smelled faintly of rain and warm earth. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the stillness of her home, the creak of the oak, the settling of the porch, the slow exhale of safety returning. Then a sound broke through it, a faint ping from inside the house, the soft chime of her computer alerting to a new message. Tony glanced toward the door. Expecting someone? Lena stood slowly, setting her mug down. No. She crossed the yard, her steps steady, the unease coiling just beneath her ribs. When she reached the doorway, she saw the notification glowing on her laptop screen, an anonymous email. Subject: Play me. Her reflection stared back from the dark monitor. She clicked once. The video opened. Colin's face filled the frame, recorded somewhere dim, his tone low and deliberate. You think you won, Mom. But there's more you don't know. Lena's breath caught. The cursor blinked in silence, the screen frozen on his smirk. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering the last of the sawdust across the yard. The glow of the laptop screen faded, leaving Lena's reflection in the dark glass, steady, unflinching, but colder than before. Colin's recorded smirk hung in her mind long after she closed the file. There was no anger left in her, only purpose. By morning, Allison was already on the line. He filed again, she said flatly. A new petition, contesting the will this time, claims undue influence and diminished capacity. Lena's hand tightened around the phone. He's still reaching for something that's gone. He's not reaching, Allison replied. He's clawing. Lena let out a slow, deliberate breath. Then we'll make sure his last grab draws blood. 3 days later, the courthouse corridors echoed with the familiar sound of Lena's heels. The petition had been fast-tracked, a final desperate swing before Colin's credibility collapsed completely. Allison walked beside her, tablet in hand, expression razor-sharp. The courtroom was smaller this time, quieter. No cameras, no spectators, just exhaustion thick in the air. Beth sat 2 seats from Colin, her once polished composure shattered. She looked brittle, pale, clutching a tissue that hadn't been used. Colin, on the other hand, looked defiant, his jaw set, his voice already rising before the hearing began. "She's manipulating the system," he snapped to his new lawyer, a man too weary to respond. "You saw that video. She's not even denying she—" The bailiff's voice cut through. "All rise." The judge, a different one this time, older and less tolerant of theatrics, looked over his glasses at the stack of filings before him. "This is the third petition from Mr. Ward in as many months," he said. "I trust this one will be worth my time." Allison stood, calm as always. "It won't be, Your Honor, but we'll indulge it long enough to put it to rest." Colin's lawyer began the same tired argument. Lena had been confused, manipulated, her estate coerced. But it lacked conviction now. The words sagged under the weight of everything that had already been proven false. When it was Allison's turn, she moved with the precision of a surgeon. "Your Honor, my client is 70 years old, yes, but every year of her life has been recorded in clarity." She set a binder on the table with a deliberate thud. 30 years of tax returns. 2 decades of professional evaluations from her tenure as principal of Hawthorne Elementary. Recorded interviews, time-stamped correspondence, cognitive assessments, all voluntarily produced. Every one of them signed by Lena Ward in her own unmistakable hand. She paused, letting the silence build. "If this court wishes, I'll also submit 3 recent video statements from my client describing, in perfect detail, the contents of her will, recorded on separate days, witnessed, and notarized." The judge raised a brow. "That won't be necessary, Ms. Drake. I remember the last case. Your evidence tends to speak for itself." Across the aisle, Beth whispered something to Colin, her face trembling. Then, in a sudden burst of desperation, she stood. "Your Honor, I was just following my husband's lead. I didn't want to hurt her. I thought—" "Mrs. Ward," the judge interrupted sharply, "you are not the defendant here, but I suggest you stop talking before you become one again." Beth sat, eyes filling with tears that convinced no one. Colin leaned forward, fists clenched. "This is a setup. She's got all these people, lawyers, friends, helping her twist the truth. She's been plotting since before Dad died." Lena rose slowly, her voice quiet but cutting through the room like a bell. "Plotting? No, Colin, planning. There's a difference." Allison laid a steadying hand on her arm, but the judge waved it off. "Let her speak." Lena met her son's eyes across the room. "You've crossed every line a son could. You stole my name, my peace, my trust. And when truth came for you, you called it betrayal." Her tone never rose, but every word struck like iron. "I didn't destroy you, Colin. You did that all on your own." The judge leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I've seen enough." He looked to the clerk. Motion denied. Petition dismissed with prejudice. Colin's lawyer lowered his head. "Your Honor." "Don't," the judge said sharply. "Not another word." He turned to Colin. "You've wasted the court's time and resources. You will pay restitution for the filing fees and an additional fine for court abuse. If you attempt to contest again, I'll see to it that sanctions follow." Colin slumped back, the fight draining out of him at last. Lena gathered her papers, nodding once toward the bench. Thank you, Your Honor. As she turned to leave, Beth's voice cracked behind her. He didn't mean it to go this far. Lena paused at the door, but she didn't look back. That's what people always say after they've gone too far. Outside, the courthouse steps were empty this time. No reporters, no flashing cameras. Just a gray Boise afternoon, the sound of passing cars, and the faint smell of rain in the air. Allison walked beside her, exhaling. It's over. For good. Lena's eyes drifted to the horizon. Nothing's ever for good, not with him. Allison frowned. You think he'll try again? Lena shook her head. No. He's too proud for that. She stopped at the bottom step, the wind lifting a strand of silver hair from her face. But pride like his doesn't die. It festers. Allison followed her gaze, down the street, where a black SUV idled at the corner again, silent and unmoving. Lena's jaw tightened. He's out of the courtroom, she murmured, but not out of the story. The SUV's taillights flared once, then vanished into the turning lane. Lena didn't move until the street was empty. The snow had melted into memory by the time Lena returned to Drake & Associates. Spring sunlight slanted through the glass walls, soft and pale, casting long golden stripes across Allison's desk. The air carried the quiet of closure, the kind that settles after too many battles fought and won. This should be the last one, Allison said as she opened a new document on her screen. Her tone was professional, but there was a warmth beneath it, an unspoken respect earned over months of shared resolve. Lena adjusted her glasses, scanning the draft. No family listed, she said. That's correct. Allison nodded. All assets under your name, home, savings, annuities, will transfer directly to the Lena Ward Literacy Foundation upon your death. You'll remain trustee until then. Lena smiled faintly. A house that once sheltered lies can still give others a chance to learn truth. Allison met her gaze. You're sure about this? Lena's voice softened. I've never been surer of anything. The bloodline ends with me, the legacy doesn't. Allison printed the document, the hum of the machine filling the quiet. Lena signed her name once, slowly, her pen moving across the page with calm precision. Each stroke felt like a door closing gently. Done, Allison said. No one can ever contest this. Even if they tried, it wouldn't make it past the clerk's desk. Good, Lena said. Let the courts finally rest too. 2 weeks later, she stood on the courthouse steps, not as a defendant, not as a target, but as a woman free of what bound her. The foundation paperwork had gone through. Her home, her savings, even her modest pension, all now carried her name for a purpose she could live with. At the bank, she opened a new account under the Lena Ward First Generation Scholarship Fund. The teller smiled politely, unaware of the history folded inside the gesture. What's the scholarship for? She asked. Lena's eyes drifted toward the window where sunlight hit the flagpole outside. For kids who were told they weren't enough, she said. Now they'll get proof they are. The teller nodded. Typing. Beautiful mission, Mrs. Ward. Just long overdue, Lena murmured. By the time she drove home, the world had rearranged itself again. The front garden, once trampled by careless visitors, bloomed with daffodils Tony had planted earlier that week. The new gate gleamed under its brass latch. And on the mailbox someone, probably Mrs. Brooks, had placed a small sign. Welcome home, Lena. She smiled, the kind that didn't need witnesses. Inside, the scent of lemon polish and fresh tea filled the house. On the table sat a vase of white tulips and a handwritten card from Debbie. You won more than you know. Lena traced the ink with her fingertips. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she did neither. That weekend, she hosted a small lunch in the backyard, the first gathering her home had seen since all of it began. The sky was a clear, forgiving blue, and the oak tree threw dappled shadows across the table. Allison brought a bottle of sparkling cider. Tony grilled chicken and vegetables with the patience of a craftsman. Susan arrived with homemade pie and gossip about the neighborhood. Beth's car got repossessed last week, Susan said quietly, a hint of pity in her tone. Colin filed for bankruptcy. Lena didn't react, just set her glass down gently. Consequences have their own clock, she said. Sometimes they run slow, but they never stop. Tony looked at her with quiet admiration. You really don't carry bitterness, do you? Lena smiled faintly. Bitterness takes root where peace should grow. They ate, laughed softly, and for once, no one mentioned the past. The air held the easy rhythm of people who had walked through fire and learned how to sit in its light. As the afternoon waned, Lena looked around the table, at the lawyer who believed her, the friend who stood guard, the neighbor who saw truth before anyone else, and felt the first flicker of contentment she'd allowed herself in years. When everyone had gone, she stayed on the bench Tony had rebuilt, her hands folded in her lap. The wind carried the faint hum of the town, distant church bells, a dog barking, the whisper of passing tires on the road. Her home felt alive again. Not a fortress, not a prize, just hers. She looked up at the oak tree, sunlight glinting through its branches, and thought of all the things she'd lost: trust, family, years, and all the things she'd gained instead. A foundation that would outlive her. A house that finally belonged only to truth. And a name that no longer needed defending. A text buzzed on her phone. It was from Debbie. Debbie, they're talking about a state award for elder justice cases. Allison nominated you. Lena smiled, shaking her head. Lena, tell her I don't need awards. I already got my life back. She set the phone down and closed her eyes, breathing in the quiet. Somewhere beyond the fence, thunder rolled low and distant, a sound of change, not warning. Lena looked toward the horizon, her voice barely above a whisper. Let it come. By late summer, Boise had warmed into gold. The air buzzed faintly with cicadas, and the scent of cut grass drifted through open windows. For the first time in years, Lena Ward woke without a knot in her chest. The world no longer pressed down. It invited her back in. She stood in front of the community center mirror, adjusting the lapel of her navy jacket. Her reflection looked different. Stronger, somehow, but gentler too. The lines on her face hadn't softened. They'd deepened with purpose. All set, came Allison's voice from the doorway. You're up in 5. Lena turned, smiling. I used to give talks to auditoriums full of teenagers. This can't be any worse. Allison grinned. Teenagers don't have press passes. The small auditorium was full. Neighbors, city officials, social workers, teachers. On the front row, Tony sat with his hands clasped, a quiet pillar as always. Debbie was beside him, phone in hand, already ready to record. Mrs. Brooks had even brought a small bouquet of daisies, which sat beside a pitcher of water on the podium. Lena took the stage to polite applause. Her heart thudded once, then steadied. Good evening, she began, her voice steady but warm. I never thought I'd be standing here tonight, not because I didn't believe in justice, but because I didn't think justice believed in me. The room grew still. She spoke not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a teacher again, each word deliberate, grounded in truth. She told them about trust misplaced, signatures forged, and how silence can feel like safety until it becomes a weapon against you. I learned that sometimes, she said, glancing toward the window where sunlight poured in. The people who claim to protect you are the ones you must protect yourself from. But if you document, if you speak up, if you refuse to disappear, they lose their power. When she finished, the applause was different this time, longer, heavier with feeling. People stood, Some cried quietly. Allison squeezed her shoulder as she stepped down. "You just started something," she murmured. Lena smiled faintly. "Good. Then it wasn't all for nothing." Within a week, Allison's inbox overflowed. Women, mostly older, some widowed, some alone, wrote in with their stories, forged checks, manipulated wills. Children who thought they could rewrite their parents' endings. Allison called Lena one afternoon, voice tight. "They keep saying the same thing, Lena. I saw your story. I thought I was the only one." Lena closed her eyes, listening. "Then we need to give them somewhere to go." 2 weeks later, the backyard that had once been a hiding place became a gathering ground. The oak tree spread its branches wide, casting shade over folding chairs and a table lined with tea and cookies. The first meeting was small, 7 women and 1 man. They came with quiet voices and careful eyes, unsure how much to trust strangers with wounds still raw. Lena greeted each of them like old students returning home. "I can't fix what's been done," she said softly, "but I can show you how I fought back, and how you can too." The meetings grew. Every Saturday, more chairs appeared, more stories poured out under the Boise sun. Allison stopped by to offer free consultations. Tony handled the setup. Even Debbie wrote a short article for the Idaho Women's Chronicle. The principal, who turned her pain into protection. Then one afternoon, a reporter from a local magazine visited. Lena sat with him under the oak, the same bench Tony had rebuilt. He asked the usual questions: how it started, what kept her going, what she'd learned. But when he asked if she'd ever forgiven her son, she paused for a long time. "I don't carry forgiveness," she said quietly. "I carry freedom." Forgiveness would mean he still mattered enough to hold that space. He doesn't anymore. The line made the article's headline: "She didn't forgive. She freed herself." It went viral in a way small-town stories rarely did. A month later, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived, postmarked from a nearby college. The return address read, "Boise State Scholarship Office." Lena opened it at her kitchen table, the afternoon light soft against the curtains. Inside was a handwritten note on lined stationery. "Dear Mrs. Ward, my name is Emily. I'm the first recipient of your scholarship. My mom always said I reminded her of a teacher she had, strong but quiet. When I read about you, I realized she meant that as the highest compliment. I'm studying education. Someday I want to teach kids like you did. Thank you for believing in people like me, even though you've never met us. P.S. The foundation sent me a photo of your house. I hope one day I'll be that brave inside my own. Emily Ramirez, freshman, Boise State University." The words blurred. Lena blinked hard, but the tears came anyway. Slow, unguarded, unstoppable. The first she'd allowed herself since the night she'd stood in her yard, watching her son betray her through glass. She pressed the letter to her chest, breathing through the ache that wasn't pain anymore. It was release. Outside, the wind picked up, stirring the oak leaves into motion. Laughter from the next yard floated over the fence. Young, bright, alive. Lena wiped her face, smiling through the tears. Freedom wasn't silence or distance, it was legacy. It was truth that outlived the lies. She looked out at her backyard, the same space where betrayal had once begun, and whispered, "We're done hiding." A single gust of wind swept through, carrying the scent of daffodils and sawdust. Then her phone chimed. A new voicemail. It was Allison's voice. Urgent. Low. "Lena, call me back. Something's come up with Colin's case. You're going to want to hear this." Lena's hand stilled over the phone, her heartbeat rising, not in fear, but in readiness. The call from Allison went unanswered. Lena listened to the voicemail twice, then powered off her phone, slipping it into the drawer of her desk beside Emily's letter. She didn't want to know. Not yet. For the first time in a long time, she wanted quiet that no one else could reach. By the next morning, her car was packed. Just enough for 1 week. A few clothes, her journal, a thermos, and the paperback copy of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn she'd read every spring since college. No itinerary, no calls, no explanations. The drive north was long and unhurried. Fields stretched wide and green, breaking now and then into pine forests that smelled of rain and soil. The radio stayed off. Her mind filled the silence with something gentler. Memories that didn't hurt anymore, faces she could remember without bitterness. By late afternoon, she reached the small lakeside retreat she'd booked under her middle name. The cabin was simple: cedar walls, a narrow porch, a view of still water that shimmered silver under the sun. The air was so clean it almost startled her. Inside, she unpacked slowly, placing her journal on the nightstand. She opened to a blank page and wrote the date at the top in neat handwriting. For once, the world doesn't need to be fixed. It just needs to be felt. That evening, she walked the trail that wound around the lake, her boots crunching on gravel, the breeze catching in her hair. The sun dipped low, turning the water to liquid gold. For the first time in months, her heartbeat felt like it belonged to her again. Steady, measured, free. Days passed in rhythm, not schedule. Mornings with coffee on the porch. Afternoons with ink on her hands. She filled page after page of her journal with thoughts she hadn't dared to write before. About Colin. About grief that never really ended. About peace that didn't need forgiveness to exist. She hiked the northern ridge one morning, stopping at a lookout that stretched over miles of forest. From up there, the world looked honest, no secrets, no power plays, just the simplicity of distance. On the fourth day, a knock came at the cabin door. Debbie stood there, smiling under her straw hat, holding a bag that smelled like cinnamon and something stronger. "You didn't think I'd let you hide out without company, did you?" Lena blinked, then laughed. A real laugh, the kind that startled even her. "You tracked me down?" "I bribed Allison," Debbie said, stepping inside. "She said you'd bite if I brought pie and wine." They spent the afternoon on the dock, feet dangling over the edge, the bottle between them. Debbie talked about work, her husband's terrible cooking, how the scholarship fund already had 3 new applicants. Lena mostly listened, but every so often she found herself laughing, loud and unguarded, until her sides ached. When dusk fell, Debbie strung a line of small lanterns between 2 trees. Their light shimmered against the water, soft and amber. A portable speaker played something slow and familiar. Ella Fitzgerald's voice rising like a sigh through the night. "Come on," Debbie said, holding out a hand. Lena hesitated, then stood. They danced barefoot on the grass, the earth cool beneath their feet, the lantern swaying overhead. It wasn't graceful, but it was alive. 2 women who'd both carried too much finally letting it drop. Halfway through the song, Lena stopped, laughing breathlessly. "If anyone's watching from across the lake, they'll think we've lost it." Debbie grinned. "Let them. Losing it looks good on you." They stayed out until the stars came, thick and bright enough to paint the lake in silver. For once, there was no noise in Lena's head, no shadows at the edges of her thoughts. Just laughter, water, and the sound of crickets. The next morning, her phone blinked on the nightstand, a string of missed calls, unread messages, all unanswered. She scrolled through them briefly, then set it face down. The world could wait. A single text came through from Susan. "Your house has never been quieter. It's like it's breathing again." Lena smiled. That afternoon, Tony's truck appeared at the edge of the gravel drive. He waved from the bed before unloading a neat stack of firewood beside her porch. He didn't come up, just left an envelope resting on top. Inside was a short note in his careful handwriting. For when the nights get cold again. You've earned the warmth. Tony Lena held the note to her chest, feeling something deep and wordless. Gratitude that wasn't bound by language. She spent her final evening by the water, wrapped in a shawl. Fire crackling low beside her. The sky dimmed into purple and then black, stars reflected perfectly in the still lake below. She opened her journal one last time and wrote, "Peace isn't what you're given, it's what you take back, piece by piece, until it fits again." Her pen hovered for a moment before she added a final line. And sometimes, it only comes after everything else is gone. As she closed the journal, a distant rumble echoed across the lake. Thunder, faint but near. She tilted her head toward the sound, her expression unreadable. Then, for no reason she could name, she whispered into the dark, "I'm ready." Lightning flickered once, far away, painting the water white for a heartbeat. Lena didn't flinch. She only smiled. When Lena pulled into her driveway, the air smelled faintly of lilac and rain. The gravel crunched beneath her tires, the house ahead framed by new sunlight and blooming daffodils. She turned off the engine and sat for a moment, just looking, really looking. No tension in her chest, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. The front door opened easily now, the hinges smooth from Tony's careful work. Inside, the air was fresh, faintly lemony, the kind of clean that felt lived in rather than scrubbed raw. A vase of wildflowers sat on the dining table, lilies, white tulips, and sprigs of rosemary. No note, just peace, left in place of apology. Her first morning home began with coffee on the porch, and no deadlines. She watched the mail truck pass without flinching. For the first time in years, nothing in her life required defending. She filled her days quietly, but deliberately. Twice a week. She drove to the Boise Community Center, room 204, where a whiteboard bore the words Adult Literacy, Free Class with Mrs. Ward. The first class was small, a mechanic who wanted to read to his grandson, a single mother finishing her GED, and an older woman who confessed she'd faked her way through her 20s. "Don't worry about what you missed," Lena told them, writing the word beginning on the board in neat cursive. "We all start here, together." Their progress was slow, but steady, and by the third week, laughter had replaced embarrassment. She found herself leaving class lighter than she'd arrived, her teacher's rhythm finding its way back into her bloodstream. One Thursday, Allison stopped by the classroom. "They mentioned your name at a state policy roundtable today," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Your case is being cited for new elder protection legislation. It's making waves." Lena chuckled softly. "I spent my whole life enforcing rules. Guess it's only fair I end up rewriting a few." Allison smiled. "You've done more than rewrite them. You've made them impossible to ignore." Months slipped by. The seasons turned gold, then gray, then bright again. In time, Colin and Beth's names faded from the news, then from conversation, then from thought. Their house sold quietly to a young family who planted maple trees along the fence line. No forwarding address was ever filed. No word ever came. And that, Lena decided, was mercy enough. Tony stopped by occasionally to mend something that didn't really need mending. He'd leave the same way he always had, softly, without fuss, after sharing tea or helping her haul wood for the fireplace. Susan still texted from next door, sending small updates that stitched the rhythm of normal life back together. "The Ward's old house got painted yellow. Your garden's winning again in the neighborhood contest. Can't believe it's been a year already." Lena would read them with a smile, never replying right away, but always replying eventually. One autumn morning, she hired a local carpenter to install a new front gate, solid cedar, tall and elegant. She stood beside him as he worked, watching the panels fall into place, the fresh wood gleaming in the morning light. When he asked what inscription she wanted engraved on the brass plate, she said simply, "No uninvited guests." He laughed softly. "That'll keep most folks honest." She nodded. "It's not for most folks." The gate shut with a deep, satisfying click. That night, the first frost of winter swept in, frosting the windows and crisping the air. Lena lit a fire in the hearth, the kind that popped and hummed with life. She settled into her armchair with a blanket draped over her knees, her late husband's favorite book resting on her lap. The Old Man and the Sea. She traced his handwriting inside the cover, faded but familiar. For Elle, who never stops fighting, even when she shouldn't have to. She smiled, curling into the chair as the flames danced. Outside, the wind whispered against the new gate, testing it, then moving on. The world beyond her walls could keep its noise. Inside, there was only warmth, the slow exhale of a life finally earned. As she turned the last page, the firelight caught the framed photo on the mantel. Her husband, young and laughing, his arm around her shoulders. She raised her mug toward it, a quiet toast. "For both of us," she said softly. "We made it." The clock ticked steady in the background, the sound of peace measured in seconds instead of battles. Lena leaned back, eyes half closed, letting the rhythm of the house settle around her. No intrusions, no echoes, just home. And as the fire burned low, she whispered the words she'd been saving all along. "They thought I'd be too old to fight back, but I came back smarter, stronger, and finally free." The last ember cracked, flared, and glowed until only warmth remained.